The hum of the KSV Deadliest was a sound so constant that Jean, the ship's botanist, had stopped hearing it. It was the sound of everything working. He was in the small lab, studying a sample of violet moss from their last planetfall. The moss was tough, built for a dry world, not unlike the one they were now passing. Mina, the engineer, was in the engine access corridor. She was running a standard diagnostic. Her hands moved over the tools with an easy confidence. Everything red-green. She wiped a bit of sweat from her forehead. The ship's air was warm, but not hot. Just standard operational warmth. In the cockpit, Tay, the pilot and commander, watched the starfield. Their course was clear for another 6 hours. Then they would adjust. It was quiet duty. He sipped from a bulb of water. His eyes were calm, watching the screens that watched the ship. The first sign was a flicker of light. Not on the main screen, but on a smaller one to Tay's left. A power fluctuation in the secondary drive coil. A tiny, almost meaningless blip. Tay leaned forward, his calm face tightening just a little. He tapped the screen to bring up the data. Before his fingers could finish, the hum changed. It dropped in pitch. It became a low groan, a sound of metal under terrible stress. The lights in the cockpit flashed once and dimmed to a dull orange. What was that? Jin's voice came over the ship speaker, tight with alarm. Checking, Mina's voice replied, sharp and focused. Tay could hear the clatter of tools from the corridor. Where she worked, Tay's hands flew over his console. Warning messages began to scroll, too fast to read. The main one was big and red. Drive cascade failure. Mina, report, Tay said, his voice loud in the suddenly small cockpit. It's the primary motivator. It's... Her sentence ended in a yell as the Deadliest gave a massive, sickening shudder. It wasn't like turbulence. It was like the ship had been kicked by a giant. Tay was thrown forward against his restraints. In the lab, Jean was flung from his stool, crashing into a cabinet of samples. Glass shattered. In the corridor, Mina grabbed a handhold just in time, her feet leaving the floor as the ship lurched at a deep, grinding scream tore through the hull. All the lights died, plunging them into absolute blackness for 2 terrifying heartbeats. Then the thin, red glow of emergency lighting sputtered on. The groan of dying metal was replaced by a new sound, the howl of wind. The ship was falling, spinning, tumbling through atmosphere. Tay fought the controls. They were sluggish, almost dead. He could see nothing on the forward screen but streaks of orange and red. Fire. They were on fire. Alarms he didn't even know existed were blaring. A choir of mechanical panic. Brace! Brace for impact! He shouted, knowing it was useless but needing to say it. Jean curled into a ball on the floor, arms over his head. Mina pulled her legs up, making herself as small a target as possible in the narrow corridor. The world became noise and force. A series of terrible crashes, each one slamming the breath from their lungs. Tay felt a rib crack against his restraint harness. Metal shrieked and tore. Something heavy broke loose and smashed into the back of his chair. The spinning slowed, replaced by a brutal, scraping slide that seemed to go on forever. Then, silence. It was thick and heavy, broken only by the ping of cooling metal and the faint hiss of escaping gas. The red emergency lights cast long, eerie shadows. Tay gasped, pain flaring in his chest. He unclipped his harness with shaking hands and fell into his console. He immediately called out, Jean, Mina, sound off. A groan came first, then Jin's voice, weak but clear. I'm here. I'm cut. Not bad. I can move. Mina. A moment of terrifying silence. Then a cough. Here. My arm. Think it's broken. But I'm here. Tay tried the ship's main systems. Nothing. He switched to the emergency battery. A few console lights flickered on. The data was bad. Very bad. The ship was in pieces around them. The main drive was gone. The comms array was damaged. But one thing was working, the distress beacon. He activated it with a hard press of his thumb. A soft, repeating pulse filled the cockpit. A call for help. He pulled up the navigation log from the backup. He calculated their position, then searched for friendly signals. A result flashed. Tay's blood went cold. The nearest vessel capable of rescue was the KSV Morning Star. Its estimated time of arrival to their location was 49.5 hours. He looked at the ship's internal emergency power reading. The batteries for the habitation module, where they were now, could maintain minimal life support air recycling basic heat for 48 hours. Maybe. He pushed himself out of the chair, wincing at the pain in his chest. He moved to the lab door. It was bent but opened when he forced it. Jean was sitting on the floor, pressing a piece of cloth to a cut on his forehead. Violet moss was scattered everywhere. Mina appeared from the corridor, cradling her left arm against her body. Her face was pale, but her eyes were already scanning the damage. They gathered in the broken lab. Tay told them the numbers. 48 hours of power. 49.5 hours until a possible rescue. Mina understood first. Her eyes went to the cracked viewport. Outside was a rocky, gray landscape under a dull red sun. Strange violet plants clung to the stones. So we have less power than we have time to wait. Yes, Tay said quietly. Jean looked from the bleak outside view to the sad, dim red lights of their dying ship. The air already smelled of burned wiring and fear. Tay took a deep, painful breath. He looked at his crew. He saw the shock in Jin's eyes, the pain in Mina's face. He saw something else, too, a stubborn spark. He knew them. They were not people who just waited. We could stay in here, Tay said, his voice low but steady. We could try to sleep, to breathe slowly, to make the power last. We could hope the rescue ship is fast. He paused, looking at each of them. Or, he said, we could get to work. The silence after Tay's words was heavy. The idea of work felt too big for the broken space around them. Work for what? They were stranded. Jean was the first to move. He stood up slowly, wincing. He walked to the cracked viewport, ignoring the blood on his own face. He looked out at the violet plants clinging to the gray rocks. His mind, trained for this, started to shift. It stopped seeing a wasteland and started seeing parts. The spine fruit, he said, his voice quiet but clear. He pointed at a cluster of thick, cactus-like plants not far from the ship's torn hull. See the pulpy core? It stores water. We can extract it. But the fruit on top, it's acidic. Probably toxic if you eat too much. Mina limped over, cradling her arm. She followed his gaze. So we have a water source we can't fully use, and food we don't have. Maybe not, Jean said. He turned away from the window. If I could control its environment, warm it, regulate the soil moisture, I might be able to force a different growth. A sweeter fruit, or at least get more water from it. But I need a closed space. A greenhouse. Mina let out a short, pained laugh. Right? I'll just pop down to the planet's hardware store. No, Jean said, his eyes now scanning the interior of the wrecked lab. We build it. From here. Tay listened, his arms crossed over his sore chest. He saw the spark in Jin's eyes catching. He gave a single nod. Do it. What do you need first? Jean started listing things. Frame material. Something transparent or translucent for the walls to let light in. Sealant. Something for the soil bed. Mina was already thinking like an engineer. Her eyes darted around, assessing the carcass of their ship. Frame we can do. The interior support struts in the cargo bay are lightweight alloy. We can cut them. We have the manual cutter in the tool locker if the power's gone. Sealant. We have hull patch foam. It's not pretty, but it will glue and insulate. She paused. But transparent material? We don't have any panels left. They all blew out. Jin's face fell. The plan died before it started. For a long while, the only sound was the faint hiss from a broken pipe. They sat in the gloom. Tay handed Jean a clean cloth for his cut. Mina used some scrap and tape from a first aid kit to make a rough sling for her arm. Later, feeling useless, Jean decided to take a cautious walk just outside the broken airlock. He needed to see the spine fruit up close. The air was cold and thin, but breathable. The red sun gave a weak, tired light as he examined the plants. something else caught his eye. On a sun-facing cliff face nearby, a patch of the rock glittered. It wasn't stone. It looked smooth, like glass. He moved closer, careful on the loose rocks. The patch was about the size of his hand. It was perfectly clear, like a window pane stuck to the stone. As he watched, a small creature moved across it. It was about as long as his finger, with a hard, iridescent shell and many legs. A glint weevil. It stopped, seemed to press its head to the rock, and moved on. Where it had been, a fresh, wet-looking trail remained. It hardened in seconds under the sun, adding another tiny, transparent layer to the patch. Jin's breath caught. He hurried back to the ship, his injury forgotten. "Mina! Tay!" he called, scrambling through the airlock. He explained what he saw, his words tumbling out. "They make it. They excrete it. It's a silica-based secretion. It hardens into a glass-like layer. They're drawn to the sunlight on the cliff face." Mina's mind, solving problems even through pain, lit up. "So they're living glass factories. We just need to herd them. Give them a frame to work on instead of a cliff." The plan reformed wilder now. They gathered their tools. Tay and Jean, working together, used the manual cutter to sever 4 of the thin support struts. It was hard work. The metal was tough. Their muscles ached. Sweat stung the cut on Jin's forehead. They welded the struts into a simple box-like frame using the last charge from an emergency tool battery. Mina, with one good arm, worked on the bait. She took a damaged power cell and carefully broke it open. Inside were powdered metals. She mixed this with a little water and some sticky sap Jean collected from a root, making a thick paste. They carried the frame outside and placed it in a spot that got full sun. Mina smeared the metal paste in a careful grid pattern all over the struts. The paste glistened in the dull light. Then they waited. Nothing happened. Doubt crept in. It was a stupid idea. The creatures were probably long gone or would ignore their frame. Just as Tay was about to suggest they try something else, Jean held up a hand. A single glint weevil had appeared at the base of the cliff. It waggled its antennae. It began to climb the rock, then stopped. It seemed to sense the metal. Slowly, it changed direction. It moved toward their frame. A tiny explorer.it climbed onto the lowest strut. Found the paste. Its antennae trembled with excitement. It began to move along the paste line, its body working. A clear, viscous liquid emerged from its head, coating the metal. The substance hardened almost as soon as the weak sunlight touched it, leaving a thin, solid film. Another weevil came. Then 3 more. A small trail of them, drawn by the scent of the metal feast Mina had provided. They moved in a slow, orderly fashion along the lines of paste, laying down their glass. The humans watched, silent. They didn't cheer. It was too strange, too delicate. They just watched as their invisible shepherds guided the tiny creatures. Hour by hour, the frame ceased to be just metal. A skin of rough, translucent panels began to form. It was not perfect. It was wavy and had bubbles. But it was solid. It let the red sunlight through. As the second sun began to set, casting long blue shadows, the greenhouse stood. It was a crazy, beautiful thing. A box of alien glass made by bugs, built by shipwrecked humans. Jean carefully transplanted 3 of the smallest spine fruit plants into a bed of local soil and crushed rock inside it. The last of the ship's functional heating pads went underneath. Set to low. He closed the makeshift door, a piece of hull plating they could slide across. In the growing dark, the greenhouse looked like a lantern. The plants inside were just dark shapes. But they were in there, protected. A start. The cold was the worst part of the night. It seeped through the broken hull of the Deadliest, a deep chill that made their bones ache. They huddled in the habitation module, wrapped in thermal blankets from the emergency locker. The greenhouse stood outside, a dark shape in the starlight. Its strange glass panels faintly gleaming. Sleep was impossible. The pain from their injuries and the gnawing fear kept them awake. Tay watched the power readout on the wall. Tick down minute by minute. They had used more than they planned on the cutter and the welder for the frame. The clock in his head counted the hours they had left. When the first weak light of the red sun touched the sky, they were already moving. Stiff and sore, they stepped outside. The air was sharp. Jean went straight to the greenhouse. He slid open the metal door. Inside, the air was warmer and moist from the heated pad. The 3 spine fruit plants looked unchanged, but they were alive. That was enough for now. "We need to expand the garden," Jean said, his breath making a small cloud. "More plants mean more water, more chances. I need to clear a space to dig." They started gathering loose rocks from an area near the greenhouse. It was slow, painful work. Tay's chest screamed with every lift. Mina used her good arm to roll smaller stones aside. Jean tried to pry a larger, flat rock from the ground. It was wedged in tight that as he struggled, he noticed movement. A small creature was watching him from behind another rock. It was about the size of a large loaf of bread. It had 6 legs and a shell made of overlapping gray plates, like stone. It had 2 dark, curious eyes on stalks. Jean froze. The creature didn't run. Took a hesitant step forward. Then it curled its legs under its body. Its shell segments locked together with a soft click. It became a perfect gray ball. A slight shift in the slope of the ground made it begin to roll. It rolled gently down until it bumped against the rock Jean was trying to move. The ball uncurled. The creature looked at the rock, then at Jean. It nudged the rock with its hard head. Tay and Mina had stopped to watch. They stood very still. "What is it doing?" Mina whispered. "I don't know," Jean said. He moved his hand slowly, picking up a smaller, walnut-sized stone. He held it out. The creature's eye stalks twitched. It didn't move toward his hand. Instead, it looked at the small stone in his fingers. Then it turned and began to push at the larger, flat rock again with a stubborn determination. It was strong for its size, but the rock was too big. "It's not interested in the food," Tay observed quietly. "It's interested in the rock." Jean lowered his hand. He looked at the small stone in his palm, then at the area they were trying to clear. It was full of similar small stones and pebbles. An idea, fragile as the morning light, formed in his mind. He didn't offer the stone to the creature again. Instead, he tossed it a short distance away, onto a patch of ground already clear of big rocks but littered with gravel. The creature watched the stone land. It moved toward it not with speed but with purpose. It stopped by the small stone. It didn't try to eat it. It used its front limbs, which were surprisingly nimble, to push the stone along. It pushed it all the way to the edge of the clearing, right up against the base of a large boulder. It arranged the stone neatly against the bigger rock. Then it turned and looked back at Jean, as if waiting. "It's tidying up," Tay said, a note of wonder in his voice. Mina crouched down, wincing as her broken arm shifted. She looked around their camp. Her eyes landed on a piece of white, foamy insulation that had been torn from the ship's wall. It was lightweight and porous. She ripped off a small piece. She held the piece of foam out, placing it on the ground between her and the creature. The creature's eye stalk swung toward the foam. It approached slowly. It sniffed at the material with sensors near its mouth. Then, with a sudden, gentle carefulness, it picked up the foam in its mouth. It didn't chew it. It turned and scurried away, back toward the cliff face where the weevils lived. They watched it disappear into a small crack in the rocks. "It took it to its nest," Mina said. A few minutes later, the creature returned. Came right back to the work area. It went straight to a pile of small stones Jean had made and began, one by one, pushing them to the edge of the clearing, arranging them in a neat line against the boulder. They understood. It wasn't just curiosity. It was an instinct. Cleared small debris, and it liked soft, nesting material. Mina smiled, a real smile for the first time since the crash. "We have an understanding." She pointed at the flat rock Jean couldn't move. "We move the big one for you. You clear the small ones for us." Tay found a long, strong piece of wreckage to use as a lever. He and Jean put their weight on it. The flat rock shifted, then lifted. The creature watched. As soon as the rock was rolled aside, revealing a patch of dirt below, the creature moved in. It began methodically clearing the pebbles and gravel from the freshly exposed earth. pushing them away with efficient little shoves of its head and limbs. They worked with it for hours. They would tackle a large obstacle. The creature, and soon two of its friends who had wandered over, would swarm the area afterward, clearing it of small debris. The ground became smoother, more level. It was perfect for planting by midday. They had cleared a sizable patch next to the greenhouse. Jean was able to dig and transplant 4 more spine fruit plants. The stone rollers, as they started calling them, didn't stop. They seemed to enjoy the work. They would occasionally come over and nudge Mina's leg until she tore off another small piece of insulation foam as a reward. They would take the prize and scurry off, only to return quickly, ready for more. Tay sat on a broken crate, resting his aching chest. He watched the scene. Jean was digging in the dirt. Mina was talking softly to one of the rollers as she fed it foam. The greenhouse stood nearby, a testament to their first success. They were no longer just 3 people in a wreck. They were a system, a broken human system, now integrated with this strange, quiet world. The feeling of desperate waiting was gone, replaced by the rhythm of shared work. They were not just surviving the hours. They were filling them. The garden was growing. The sight of the cleared earth and the new, transplanted spine fruit plants gave them a quiet pride. But the numbers in Tay's head were not kind. The power cell for the habitation module was draining faster than they hoped. The heating pad in the greenhouse, the small lights they used when working inside the dark ship, it all added up. The air in the module was becoming stale, the recycling system straining. They sat inside at what was left of their small table, eating a tasteless paste from an emergency ration pack. It was fuel, not food. Jean pushed his around the container. "The plants in the greenhouse are holding moisture well," he said. "I can get water from the pulp soon. But the fruit, it's still bitter. I tasted a tiny piece. It's not good. It would make us sick if we ate enough to feel full." Mina looked at the paste in her hands. Then her eyes drifted past Jean, through the viewport, to the wreckage of the ship's main engine section. It lay about 50 meters away, a twisted sculpture of blackened metal. "The coolant system," she said quietly. Tay and Jean followed her gaze. "What about it?" Tay asked. "It's separate from the drive that exploded," she said, her voice gaining strength as the idea took shape. "It's a closed-loop system. Filters, pumps, a condenser. It's built to purify and recycle. To take a mixed fluid and separate out the clean part." Jean understood first. "You think we can use it to purify the fruit juice?" "Not just purify," Mina said, standing up. The pain in her arm seemed forgotten. "Distill. If we can ferment the fruit mash first, make alcohol, the system can separate the alcohol from the water and the bad parts. Alcohol is a solvent. It might break down the toxins. And even if it doesn't, pure alcohol is a disinfectant. It's stored energy. We could burn it. Or," she paused, "we could drink it, very carefully." It was a crazy plan, but no crazier than building a greenhouse with bug spit. They had nothing but time and desperation. The work was the hardest they had done yet. The engine wreck was dangerous. Sharp edges waited to cut them. Wires hung down. They moved slowly, carefully. Tay and Jean did the heavy lifting, following Mina's one-armed directions. The coolant unit was a heavy metal box, half-crushed. They had to cut it free from tangled pipes. The manual cutter whined and sparked. Took hours. Their muscles burned. Sweat mixed with the grime on their skin. Finally, with a loud crack, it came loose. They dragged it, inch by painful inch, back to the area near the greenhouse. The stone rollers watched from a distance, their eye stalks following the strange activity. Mina sat cross-legged on the ground with her tools. She opened the unit's housing. Inside was a complex web of tubes, filters, and a small pump. "The principle is simple," she muttered, mostly to herself. "Heat the mixture here. The vapors rise, travel through this coil which is cooled by this secondary loop. The purified liquid condenses and drips out here." She pointed. "The impurities are left behind. But the secondary loop needs coolant," Jean said. Mina nodded. "We use the one thing we have a lot of, cold air." She pointed at the thin, flexible fuel lines that had snaked away from the main wreck. We run these lines from the condenser coil out and up. We make a long, zigzagging path, high up, where the wind is coldest. The vapor will condense as it travels. Building the still became their world. Jean harvested the most mature spine fruit from the greenhouse and the wild plants. He used a clean piece of hull metal to crush them into a pulpy mash in a salvage storage bin. He added a pinch of yeast from his lab's culture samples for baking. It was a long shot, but it might start fermentation. Tay helped Mina assemble the machine. They used the crushed bin as the boiler. They attached the main coolant unit to its top. Mina repurposed a small heating element from a broken suit battery. It would be weak, but maybe enough. They snaked the fuel lines up a pile of wreckage, creating a high, winding path for the vapor to travel. It was evening when they finished. The still sat in the middle of their camp, a bizarre sculpture of junk and hope. The stone rollers gave it a wide berth. Mina connected the battery to the heating element. A faint glow came from under the bin of mashed fruit. They waited. Nothing happened for a long time. Doubt crept in again. The mash wasn't fermenting. The heat was too low. The whole idea was stupid. Then, a tiny bubble rose to the surface of the purple mash. Then another. A faint, sour-sweet smell filled the air. Fermentation. Hours later, the first drop fell. It came from the end of the fuel line, which they had pointed into a clean metal cup. A single, clear drop. It hit the cup with a faint ping. They all leaned in. The liquid was perfectly clear, unlike the purple mash. It had a sharp, chemical smell. Mina carefully dipped the very tip of a tool into it and touched it to her tongue. She winced and spat. Strong. Rough. But it's not spine fruit acid. It's something else. The drops came slowly, one every few minutes. They took turns watching through the night, keeping the battery connected, shielding the makeshift boiler from the wind. By the time the first sun rose, they had less than a shot glass worth of the clear liquid. It's full of impurities from the first run, Mina said, her voice hoarse from tiredness. We need to run it through again. Clean it. They did. They poured the small amount of first-run alcohol into a smaller, cleaner container. They attached it to a simpler setup, heating it gently. This time, the liquid that condensed was different. It still had a sharp smell, but it was floral too, like the violet moss. It was clearer than water. Mina distilled a tiny spoonful of this. She let it cool. She looked at Tay and Jean. Then she poured a few drops into 3 small caps from broken wiring. They stood in a circle in the cold morning light. They raised the caps. To not waiting, Tay said, echoing his words from the first day. They drank. The liquid was fire. It burned all the way down. It made their eyes water. But after the burn came a warmth, spreading through their cold bodies. And after the chemical taste came a strange, sweet afternote, like flowers and rocks. It was not good. But it was something. Something they had made from nothing. Something that proved they could change this place. Jean coughed and managed a smile. It needs a name. Mina looked at the still, then at the greenhouse, then at the stone rollers now venturing closer, curious about the smell. Call it Deadliest's Promise, she said. Tay nodded, feeling the warmth in his chest. It wasn't just from the drink. The power cell was still dying. The rescue was still far away. But they had made a promise to themselves, and they were keeping it. The twin moons rose, painting the rocky valley in soft blue and silver light. The temperature, which was never warm, began to drop sharply. A cold wind hissed through the torn metal of the Deadliest, a constant reminder of the shelter they had lost. Inside the habitation module, the air was thick and still. The power indicator glowed a weak, urgent red. They had maybe 10 hours of battery left. The choice was to turn everything off now and shiver in total darkness, or use a little power for a few more hours of light and basic heat. They chose the light. The feeling from the morning, the warmth of the first drink, had faded. The harsh reality of the numbers was back. They sat in silence, wrapped in blankets, listening to the wind. Jean stood up. I can't sit in here anymore, he said, his voice flat. It feels like a tomb. Tay agreed. The walls were closing in. Let's go outside. At least the air is fresh. They gathered their blankets and moved. They didn't go far. Just outside the broken airlock, in the lee of the ship's largest intact hull section. It blocked the worst of the wind. Mina, using her good arm, dragged a piece of wreckage that still had a functional internal heating coil. It was broken, but when she tapped it with a tool, it glowed a faint, dull orange, giving off a whisper of warmth. They sat on the ground, their backs against the cold metal of the ship. The stone rollers, who had been hiding from the cold wind in their cliffside cracks, emerged. They seemed to sense the tiny heat source. Slowly, one by one, they came over. They didn't beg or nudge. They simply curled into their ball shapes and settled near the glowing coil, absorbing the warmth. Soon, a small group of them slept there, peaceful and quiet. It was a small thing, but it changed the feel of the night. They were not alone in the dark. Mina looked at the still, a dark shape against the stars. She got up and walked over to it. She checked the collection cup. A few more drops had condensed in the cold night air. She poured this small amount into their shared bottle, now a quarter full of the clear spirit. She brought it back and sat down. Without a word, she poured a small measure into 3 metal caps. She handed one to Tay and one to Jean. She kept the last for herself. They didn't toast this time. They just sat, holding the caps, looking at their little camp. The greenhouse stood a few meters away. In the moonlight, the rough glass panels looked like ice. The plants inside were dark shapes, but Jean knew they were growing. He had checked them before sunset. The soil was damp. The first tiny signs of a new, less spiky fruit bud were forming on one plant. It was working. The still was a silent monument to Mina's stubborn genius. From poison, they had made warmth. And around them, the stone rollers slept, trusting the humans enough to share their space, their warmth. They had gone from curious animals to quiet companions. They had helped build this place as much as anyone. Tay took a sip. The drink was still strong, but he was getting used to it. The floral aftertaste was more noticeable now. Tasted like the planet, like the violet moss and the dry rocks. Tasted like survival. It's strange, Jean said, breaking the long silence. His voice was soft. Back on the ship, I had a garden module. Hydroponic. Perfect light, perfect nutrients. I could grow earth strawberries in deep space. He looked at his rough greenhouse. This is a mess. The glass is uneven. The soil is just crushed rock and dead moss. But it feels more real. Mina nodded, staring into her cup. On the ship, I fixed things by the book. I replaced broken parts with new ones from storage. Here, she gestured at the still with her chin. Here, I had to make the parts. I had to understand what it did, not just what it was. It's different.
Deadliest.
He was the commander. His job was the mission, the schedule, the safety of the crew. All of that was gone. His new job was them. Right here. I was always looking at the clock, he said. The next jump, the next checkpoint, the next sleep cycle. Now, the only clock that matters is the sun and the moons, and whether the plants have enough water. They fell quiet again, but it was a comfortable quiet. The fear was still there, a cold knot in each of their stomachs, but it was sharing space with something else, a kind of pride. Jean pointed at the stone rollers. Do you think they'll be here in the morning? Yes, Mina said simply. Where else would they go? This is the warmest spot on the planet right now. Tay smiled a little. It was true. Against all odds, they had created a place of relative comfort. A tiny oasis of warmth and life in a cold, gray valley. He looked up at the stars, sharp and cold in the thin atmosphere. Somewhere out there was the morning star. Maybe it was coming. Maybe it was on time. For the first time, the thought of rescue felt complicated. It meant leaving this. Leaving their glass house, their still, their rolling little helpers. It meant going back to metal halls and artificial air and clocks. He pushed the thought away. That was a problem for later. For now, they had this. They had the faint warmth of the coil, the company of sleeping alien creatures, and the slow, steady proof of their own hands' work. He finished his drink, feeling the warmth spread. "We should sleep in shifts," he said, his commander's voice returning, but softer now. "One of us stays awake to watch the coil, make sure nothing happens." Jean and Mina agreed. They didn't want to go back inside the dead ship anyway. Jean took the first watch. Tay and Mina wrapped themselves in their blankets, leaning against each other for warmth. The stone rollers slept on. The wind moaned softly over the hull. Jean watched over his little world. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. And for the first time in 48 hours, it felt like enough. The cold blue light of dawn found them stiff and sore. They had slept in short, uncomfortable shifts. The stone rollers were already awake, moving slowly in the morning chill. The tiny warmth from the broken coil was gone. Reality returned, hard and sharp. Tay went inside the habitation module first. The air was bad, stale and too warm. The red power indicator was flashing a slow, steady pulse. A final warning. He checked the readout. They had less than 4 hours of battery life remaining. He walked back out. His face told Mina and Jean everything they needed to know. "The beacon," Mina said, her voice rough from sleep and the cold air. "It's on the ship's emergency battery too. When the main hab power dies, the beacon might die with it. Or its signal will get weaker." Jean looked up at the sky, as if he could see their distress call traveling through the void. The rescue ship should be entering the system soon. If they're coming. They all knew the word Mina left unsaid. "If. We need to boost the signal," Tay said. It was not a question. "We need to give it everything we've got left." Mina's eyes went to the still, to the small heating element powered by the suit battery, then to the broken coil they had huddled around. Her mind worked, fitting broken pieces together. The beacon's transmitter needs power. More power than we have in the main battery. But we can create a burst. A short, strong pulse. It might drain every system completely. But if it's strong enough, it could be heard from farther away. "How?" Jean asked. "We turn the habitation module into a battery itself," she said. "We use the heating element from the still. We hook it directly into the main power bus. We overload it. For a few seconds, it will pull every bit of energy left in the system and blast it through the beacon's transmitter. It will be like a shout instead of a whisper. It could fry the beacon completely," Tay said. "It will definitely fry the heating element," Mina replied. "And after the pulse, we will have zero power. No lights, no air recycling, no heat. Nothing." The choice was stark. Die slowly in the dark over the next hours, or use all their remaining life to send one last, loud cry for help. They looked at each other. They had not come this far to fade away quietly. "Do it," Tay said. The work was tense and precise. They moved back into the failing habitation module. Mina directed, her good hand trembling slightly from cold and nerves. Jean carefully disconnected the small heating coil from the still's battery pack. Tay opened the main power panel, a maze of colorful wires. Following Mina's instructions, Tay found the thick red and black cables that fed the distress beacon. Mina showed Jean how to splice the wires from the heating element into those cables. They had to be careful. A mistake could ruin the beacon forever. They worked in near silence, the only sound their breathing and the soft clicks of tools. The flashing red power light seemed to pulse faster, counting down their last minutes of power. Outside, the stone rollers seemed to sense the tension. They had stopped their gentle tidying and gathered near the doorway, watching the humans with their dark, unblinking eyes. Finally, it was ready. A tangle of wires connected the heating element to the ship's heart. Mina held the small, disconnected battery that would act as the trigger. One touch would complete the circuit and send the surge. "Ready?" she asked, her finger hovering. Tay took a last look at the control panel, at the dying lights of his ship. He thought of the greenhouse, the still, the little creatures outside. He nodded. Jean put a hand on the cold wall, as if saying goodbye. He nodded too. Mina touched the wire to the battery terminal. For a second, nothing happened. Then the lights in the module blazed with a painful white intensity. Every console screen flashed on, overloaded with data. A deep, vibrating hum filled the small space, growing louder and higher in pitch until it was a piercing whine. The heating element in Mina's hand glowed red, then white-hot, and melted into a useless lump with a sizzle. The whine reached its peak. They felt it in their teeth. Then, with a final blinding flash from every light, everything died. The silence was absolute. It was a thick, black total nothing. No hum of air processors. No glow of indicators. No light at all. The only sound was their own heartbeats pounding in their ears, and the faint whistle of the wind outside. They had done it. They had shouted with their last breath. Now they had to wait in the dark. They stumbled back outside, their eyes struggling to adjust. The world seemed different. The red sun was up, but their camp felt empty. The ship was no longer a shelter. It was a dead metal cave. The stone rollers approached cautiously, nudging their legs. They seemed confused by the sudden silence from the ship. Tay, Mina, and Jean did not speak. They simply sat down together on the ground, near their greenhouse. They had no power, no beacon, no way to know if their shout had been heard. They had only what they had built with their own hands. They waited. The sun climbed slowly. The hours ticked by, marked only by the movement of shadows across the rocks. They drank a little water Jean collected from the plants. They ate the last of the bland paste. They said nothing. Each minute felt like an hour. Every sound, the wind, a falling stone, made them look up, hoping for the roar of an engine. Only the empty sky looked back. The hope that had grown over the last 2 days began to shrink, replaced by a cold, heavy feeling. They had done everything they could. It had been remarkable, but perhaps it had not been enough. They sat together, watching the sky, as the last of their 48 hours slipped away. The red sun was at its highest point, a dull coin in the gray sky. It had been over 50 hours since the crash. Tay knew this without a clock. He knew it in his stiff bones and his dry mouth. They sat against the wall of the greenhouse, the last bit of warmth on the planet. The stone rollers were curled nearby, sensing the somber mood. No one had spoken for a long time. The silence was not the good kind from the night before. It was the silence of an end. Mina stared at the dirt between her feet. Jean looked at his hands, calloused and cut from 2 days of impossible work. They had turned survival into a kind of art. But art didn't save you. Only a ship could do that. A shadow passed over the sun. It was a quick, smooth movement. Not a cloud. Clouds didn't move like that on this world. All 3 of them looked up at the same time. The thing in the sky was not the KSV Morning Star. It was a ship, but it was all smooth curves and a dark, non-reflective surface. It made no sound as it descended. It was smaller than a survey vessel, more like a lifeboat, but its design was unfamiliar. It was not human. It landed softly on the flat ground 100 meters away, kicking up no dust. A ramp extended from its side. Touching the rocks without a sound. 2 figures emerged. They were tall and slender, dressed in form-fitting environment suits of a gray material. Their faces were hidden behind smooth, dark visors. They moved with a strange, graceful economy, no step wasted. One held a small device that glowed with soft light. The humans stood up slowly. Tay stepped slightly in front of Mina and Jean, an old instinct. The stone rollers, alarmed, curled into their balls and rolled behind the greenhouse for safety. The 2 aliens walked toward the wreck of the Deadliest. They scanned it with their device. They spoke to each other in low, musical tones the humans could not understand. Then, their attention shifted. They turned their visored heads. They looked past the dead ship. They saw the greenhouse. The lead alien stopped walking. His head tilted. It looked at the structure made of struts and wavy alien glass, at the vibrant violet plants growing inside. It took a few steps closer, studying it. Its companion joined, and they exchanged a few quiet words. Then they noticed the still. The bizarre assembly of the coolant unit, the fuel lines snaking up the wreckage, the collection cup. They scanned it. One of them pointed at the bottle of clear liquid sitting beside it, half full. Finally, their gaze fell on the humans themselves, and on the few brave stone rollers who had uncurled and were peeking out from behind the greenhouse. The lead alien turned off its scanner, took a step toward Tay, Mina, and Jean. It stopped a respectful distance away. A voice came from a speaker on its suit. The words were in Korean, but the tone was flat and synthetic. Your distress signal indicated a crash survival scenario, a Category 4 emergency. The humans said nothing. They just waited. The alien's visor looked from them to the greenhouse, to the still, to the domesticated creatures. It paused for a long time, as if its translation software was struggling, or as if it was simply confused that IT spoke again. The voice now tinged with something the translator could not quite hide. It was not alarm. It was profound, utter bewilderment. We see no survival scenario. It gestured with a long-fingered hand, taking in the entire camp. We see a settlement, a constructed habitat, a chemical processing facility, symbiotic local fauna. It looked directly at Tay. The dark visor was impossible to read. Your signal was a burst of extreme power, consistent with a final catastrophic failure. Our data suggested we would recover bodies, or perhaps 3 humans in hibernation pods, preserving final energy. The alien's head tilted again, like a bird examining a new type of worm. Please explain your actions in the last 48 planetary rotations. Tay glanced at Mina and Jean. He saw his own tired pride reflected in their eyes. They had been asked for a report. Not a plea for help, but an explanation of what they had done. He looked back at the alien. He felt a small, dry smile touch his lips. He gestured to their camp, just as the alien had. Would you like a tour? Tay asked, his voice steady. We might even have a drink to offer. The 2 aliens stood very still. They looked at each other. A moment of silent communication passed between them. Then the lead one turned back to Tay. It gave a single, slow nod. The other alien turned and raised a hand toward its ship. The ramp remained extended. No more figures emerged. They were not here to take over. They were here to observe, to understand. Jean walked slowly to the greenhouse and slid open the door, showing the careful rows of plants. Mina went to the still and began to explain, in simple terms, the process of fermentation and distillation. The stone rollers, gaining courage, rolled back into the open and began their work of tidying small pebbles, as if to demonstrate their part. The humans spoke. The aliens listened. They asked short, precise questions. They were not hostile. They were astonished. As the red sun began to dip toward the rocks, the rescue ship, the KSV Morning Star, finally broke through the atmosphere with a familiar roar. It came to a landing near the strange alien vessel. Human crew in bright orange suits rushed out, medical kits in hand, ready for a tragedy. They stopped, frozen at the edge of the camp. They saw their 3 missing crewmates, alive and whole. They saw them standing with 2 tall aliens. They saw them showing off a glass house made of bug spit, a still made from engine parts, and a group of local creatures that acted like helpful pets. The captain of the rescue team took off her helmet, her mouth slightly open. She looked at Tay. Tay gave her a small, tired wave. Then he turned back to the alien, holding out a small cap of the clear, floral spirit. The alien hesitated, then accepted it. It lifted its visor just enough to reveal a thin, gray mouth. It sipped. It did not react, but it did not spit it out either. It lowered the cap and gave another slow, thoughtful nod. It was not a rescue. Not anymore. It was a first contact meeting. And it was happening in a garden, built in 2 days in the middle of nowhere.